Number 10. Doggerland, the drowned world, beneath the North Sea. Long before the North Sea separated Britain from mainland Europe, there was another world in between. It was not a narrow land bridge or a few exposed islands, but a broad lowland plain of rivers, marshes, forests and grassland, stretching across what is now open water. Archaeologists call it Doggerland, and what makes it so disturbing is not simply that it existed, but that human beings lived there, hunted there, and built their lives there within the memory of our species. Then the sea took it. For thousands of years, the land remained hidden until fishing boats and dredging operations began pulling up strange evidence from the seabed: worked antler, shaped flint, animal bones, peat, and even human remains. The North Sea was not empty. It was covering a lost world. During the late Ice Age and the period that followed, sea levels were far lower than they are today. Britain was still connected to the rest of Europe, and between them lay a rich landscape that would have been highly attractive to prehistoric hunter-gatherers. Rivers crossed the plain, wetlands supported fish and birds, forests provided wood and cover, and herds of large animals moved across open ground. Red deer, wild horses and aurochs lived there, and in earlier periods mammoths had crossed the region as well. This was not a barren edge of the continent. It was useful land, fertile land that could support human communities over long periods. If you had stood there thousands of years ago, you would not have seen a future seabed. You would have seen a homeland. What makes Doggerland especially haunting is how it was rediscovered. There were no visible ruins rising from the waves, no dramatic cliffs hinting at a sunken civilization. The evidence came back in fragments: a barbed antler point brought up in a fishing net, a worked flint dredged from the sea floor, bones from animals that had walked on dry ground where ships now crossed. Later, seismic surveys created for oil and gas exploration revealed something even more unsettling beneath the North Sea floor: buried river channels, ancient hills, lake basins, and the outlines of a real landscape. Modern science was not inventing Doggerland from myth. It was mapping a place that had physically survived beneath the sediment. The sea had drowned it, but had not erased its shape. And yet Doggerland also belongs in a video about lost lands and ancient maps because it sits so close to a deeper question about memory. It would be too strong to say medieval or ancient maps proved Doggerland in any scientific way. They did not. But there is a persistent pattern in old geographical traditions of uncertain northern lands, shifting coastlines, and phantom spaces between Britain and Europe. Most of these are best explained as guesswork, error, or inherited confusion. Still, Doggerland reminds us that human beings really did watch enormous landscapes vanish at the end of the last ice age. If coastal memories survived in distorted form, if stories of drowned lands passed through generations, they would not have begun as fantasy. They would have begun with people watching familiar ground disappear. The destruction of Doggerland was not a single dramatic event at first. That is part of what makes it terrible. As ice sheets melted, sea levels rose over centuries, low ground flooded, rivers widened into estuaries, marshes spread, coastlines retreated, hunting grounds shrank, campsites disappeared. Each generation would have inherited a world slightly smaller than the one before. Then, around 6,200 BC, a far more violent blow may have struck. Off the coast of Norway, a massive submarine landslide known as the Storegga Slide triggered a tsunami that raced across parts of the North Sea basin. By then, Doggerland had already been badly reduced, but this wave may have devastated some of its final habitable areas in a matter of hours. A landscape that had been dying slowly may have suffered its last great shock all at once. That is why Doggerland remains so unsettling. It is not only a geological fact or an archaeological curiosity. It is one of the clearest examples of a human world lost to rising seas. The people who lived there had tools, routes, camps, and probably stories tied to that land. They adapted as long as they could. Some retreated, some may have perished. Their names and languages are gone, but the evidence of their existence continues to rise from the seabed piece by piece. Doggerland proves that drowned worlds are not just legends told after the fact. Sometimes they are real places that sustained real lives until the ocean moved in and turned memory into absence. Number 9, Beringia, the vanished subcontinent of the first Americans. Most people know Beringia as a land bridge, a temporary strip of ground that once connected Siberia and Alaska during the Ice Age. But that image is too small. Beringia was not just a bridge. At its greatest extent, it was a vast northern world, a broad subcontinent of grassland, river valleys, tundra, and dry plains stretching across what is now the Bering and Chukchi seas. It connected Asia and North America, but it also existed as a homeland in its own right. For thousands of years, people and animals may have lived there on land that no longer appears on modern maps. During the last glacial maximum, so much water was locked inside ice sheets that global sea levels fell dramatically. The shallow seafloor between Siberia and Alaska became exposed, creating a huge landscape known as the Mammoth Steppe. This world supported woolly mammoths, steppe bison, horses, muskoxen, caribou, and other Ice Age animals. It was cold, but it was not empty. Grasslands spread across areas now covered by Arctic water, and those grasslands could feed enormous herds. Where herds moved, humans could follow. Beringia was not a frozen wasteland at the edge of life. It was one of the great Ice Age corridors of survival. And what makes Beringia so important is its connection to the peopling of the Americas. Genetic evidence suggests that the ancestors of Native American populations spent a long period isolated from their Asian relatives before spreading into the Americas. One leading idea is that this isolation happened in or around Beringia. If true, then the first Americans did not simply sprint across a narrow bridge one day and enter a new continent. Their ancestors may have lived for generations on a vanished northern landmass, adapting to its climate, following its animals, raising children there, and becoming a distinct population before the route south opened. That changes the emotional meaning of Beringia. It was not only a passage. It may have been a cradle, a place where a people waited while ice sheets blocked the way ahead and the old world remained behind. Imagine generations living beneath low Arctic skies, knowing rivers, camps, hunting routes, animal migrations, and seasonal dangers in a land that would one day be erased by the sea. The people who lived there could not know that their homeland would become ocean. To them, it was simply the world. Beringia also belongs in this story because of maps and memory. Long before modern oceanography confirmed the full shape of the drowned land, old maps and northern geographical traditions sometimes showed strange landforms in the far North Pacific and Arctic regions. Many of these were guesses, errors, or imagined coastlines drawn by cartographers working with incomplete reports. But Beringia reminds us that not every lost northern land was fantasy. A real world once stood between Asia and America, and it was large enough to shape the future of an entire hemisphere. The fact that later maps were confused does not make the vanished land less real. It shows how difficult it is for human memory to hold a coastline after the water has moved. But the end of Beringia was slower than the fall of a city, but no less complete. As the Ice Age ended, sea levels rose. The Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea advanced over the low plains from different directions. River valleys became estuaries. Grasslands shrank. The Mammoth Steppe broke apart. Animals lost habitat. Human groups moved, split, or followed new routes into the Americas and back toward Asia. What had once been continuous land became islands, then channels, then open water. A subcontinent that had supported herds and people for thousands of years disappeared beneath shallow Arctic seas. The haunting part is that the evidence has not vanished completely. A mammoth tusk still washed from Arctic coasts. Ancient DNA still carries the signature of populations shaped by isolation and migration. The seabed still holds the buried remains of landscapes where humans may have walked before the Americas were fully settled. Beringia is not a mythic continent invented to fill a blank map. It is a confirmed, drowned world, and one of the most important lost lands in human history. That is why Beringia belongs at number 9. It reminds us that the map of human origins is partly underwater. The ancestors of millions of people may have passed through or lived upon a land that no longer exists above the waves. Every modern map shows a gap between Siberia and Alaska, but for thousands of years there was no gap. There was land, life, movement, and memory. Then the sea returned, and one of the great homelands of prehistory became a ghost beneath Arctic water. Number 8. Zealandia, the hidden continent under the Pacific. For most of modern history, New Zealand was treated as an island nation at the edge of the Pacific. Remote, mountainous, and isolated, it seemed like a set of exposed peaks rising from a vast oceanic emptiness. But beneath the water around it lies something far larger. Zealandia is now recognized by many geologists as a mostly submerged continent, with only a small fraction visible above sea level. New Zealand, New Caledonia, and a few scattered islands are not the whole story. They are the high points of a drowned landmass, almost entirely hidden beneath the Pacific. Zealandia covers millions of square kilometers, making it far too large to dismiss as a simple island chain. Its crust is continental, not ordinary ocean floor. It has a coherent geological structure, its own tectonic history, and a shape that can be traced beneath the sea by bathymetry, rock samples, and geophysical surveys. In other words, it is not a legend invented by mapmakers. It is a real continent, but one that failed to remain mostly above water. The disturbing part is that it hid in plain sight for so long. Ships crossed above it, maps showed the islands, scientists studied the region. Yet the full continental scale of Zealandia was only formally argued in recent geological literature. What makes Zealandia unsettling is the way it challenges our confidence in maps. Most people grow up learning that the continents are obvious, large, visible landmasses surrounded by water. Zealandia breaks that habit of thought. A continent does not have to be mostly dry to be real. It can exist under hundreds or thousands of meters of ocean, its mountains reduced to islands, its plains transformed into seabed, its shape visible only when modern instruments look below the surface. Sea. If a continent this large could remain outside ordinary public awareness until recently, then the map of Earth is less complete than it feels. Zealandia also carries the memory of a much older world. It was once part of Gondwana, the ancient southern supercontinent that also included Antarctica, Australia, India, Africa, and South America. As Gondwana broke apart, Zealandia separated and drifted into the Pacific. Over time, much of it sank. The reasons involve stretching, thinning, tectonic movement, and the long violence of geology. The result is a continent that did not vanish in a single flood, but slowly lost its height above the sea. Its disappearance was not human in scale. It unfolded across millions of years, long before people could have watched most of it drown. That is important because Zealandia is different from Doggerland or Beringia. It is not a lost human homeland in the same direct sense. Most of Zealandia sank long before human arrival in the Pacific. But that does not make it less powerful. It proves the larger principle that continents can disappear from the surface and remain real below the ocean. It shows that the Earth has a hidden geography, a submerged architecture that ordinary maps simplify or ignore. The ocean is not just water covering empty floor. In places, it is water covering drowned continental crust. There are also cultural echoes that make the subject more haunting, even if they must be treated carefully. Some Pacific traditions speak of lands, islands, or ancestral places connected to the sea, migration, and loss. These stories should not be forced into claims about Zealandia's ancient exposed surface, because the geological timing is far older than human memory for most of the continent. But they remind us that Pacific peoples understood the ocean not as blankness, but as a living map of routes, islands, hazards, and remembered places. In that world, land and sea were never simple opposites. The ocean could hide, separate, preserve, and erase. But the discovery of Zealandia changes the emotional scale of the Pacific. What once looked like isolated islands becomes the visible crest of something immense. New Zealand is not simply land surrounded by ocean. It is the mountaintop of a sunken continent. Beneath the waves are ridges, basins, plateaus, and continental fragments that belong to a geological body far larger than what the eye can see. The surface gives only a clue. The true form is underwater. That is why Zealandia belongs on this list. It is not terrifying because it proves an ancient civilization sank beneath the Pacific. It does not. And it is terrifying because it proves that a continent can be real and still almost invisible. It reminds us that maps are not the planet itself. They are interpretations of what we can see, measure, and agree to name. For generations, the continent was there whether textbooks counted it or not. The water covered it. The world crossed over it. And beneath the Pacific, Zealandia waited for modern science to admit that one of Earth's continents had been hiding below the waves all along. Number 7. Mauritia, the lost fragment beneath the Indian Ocean. Beneath the warm blue water around Mauritius lies a secret far older than the island itself. Mauritius looks young in geological terms, a volcanic island built from eruptions only millions of years old. Its black lava, tropical beaches, and coral edges seem to belong to the restless floor of the Indian Ocean. But when geologists studied beach sand from the island, they found something that should not have been there. Tiny zircon crystals, hundreds of millions, and in some cases billions, of years old. The island was young, the crystals were ancient. The only way to explain that mismatch was deeply unsettling, and something far older had to be buried underneath. That hidden thing is known as Mauritia, a lost fragment of continental crust beneath the Indian Ocean. It is not a fantasy continent from legend, and it is not a mythical kingdom swallowed by a single wave. It is a real geological remnant, a broken piece of ancient land tied to the breakup of Gondwana, the supercontinent that once joined India, Madagascar, Africa, Antarctica, and other southern lands. When those continents pulled apart, not every fragment remained visible. Some pieces stretched, broke, sank, and were buried beneath younger volcanic rock. Mauritia appears to be one of those ghosts, a continental shard hidden under ocean and lava. What makes Mauritia disturbing is its scale of time. Human history is measured in thousands of years. Ancient civilizations feel old after 5,000. Mauritia belongs to a timeline so deep that human memory becomes meaningless. Its zircon grains formed long before modern oceans took their current shape, long before mammals ruled the land, and long before any human ancestor walked upright. These crystals survived continental breakup, drowning, burial, volcanic eruption, erosion, and transport to a beach where modern scientists finally noticed them. A grain of sand became evidence for a lost continent. Mauritia also changes how we imagine the Indian Ocean. A map shows open water between Madagascar and India, dotted with islands. It looks like empty ocean space. But beneath that water are scars of continental violence, ridges, fragments, plateaus, and drowned crustal blocks left behind as Gondwana tore itself apart. The ocean is not blank. It is a flooded ruin of older geography. Mauritius, sitting above this buried fragment, becomes less like an isolated island and more like a volcanic mask covering the bones of a vanished land. There is a strange connection between Mauritia and old maps, but it must be handled carefully. The medieval and early modern cartographers sometimes filled the Indian Ocean with islands, imagined lands, misplaced coastlines, and uncertain southern geographies. Most of these were errors, guesses, or inherited map traditions, rather than evidence of direct knowledge. But Mauritia reminds us that the ocean really does hide land that later ages forgot or never understood. The fact that a real continental fragment lies beneath this region makes the old habit of drawing mysterious Indian Ocean lands feel less absurd than it once seemed, even if the maps themselves cannot prove it. The truly unsettling part is what Mauritia proves about continents. But they are not permanent stage floors beneath history. They break, they drown, they vanish under younger rock. A landmass can disappear so completely that only minerals harder than time itself remain to testify. If not for zircon, Mauritia might have stayed hidden. No ruined city pointed to it. No oral tradition could remember it. No human eye ever saw its ancient surface in any meaningful historical age. It was discovered because tiny crystals refused to forget where they came from. That makes Mauritia different from drowned human worlds like Doggerland. No hunter watched Mauritia sink. No village retreated from its shore in recorded or oral memory. And its loss happened in deep geological time. But it belongs in this video because it proves the larger nightmare beneath every lost continent story. The planet has swallowed land masses before, and it can hide them so well that only accidental evidence brings them back. The map of the world is a surface illusion. Under the sea are older maps written in crust, mineral, pressure, and time. Mauritia is terrifying because it reveals how much of Earth's biography remains underwater. A modern island can sit on a buried continental corpse. A beach can hold crystals older than the rock around them by more than 1 billion years. And a place that looks tropical, young and simple can be the exposed edge of a story that began when the continents themselves were still rearranging. Beneath Mauritius, the Indian Ocean keeps a fragment of a world that broke apart before humanity existed. And the only reason we know it is there is because the sand gave up a memory the sea failed to destroy. Number 6. Greater Adria, the buried continent beneath Europe. Not every lost continent sank beneath the sea. Some were destroyed in a more violent way. Greater Adria was not simply drowned, hidden, or forgotten. It was crushed beneath Europe. For millions of years, this ancient landmass drifted north from the broken remains of Gondwana, carrying shallow seas, limestone platforms, reefs, and coastlines across a vanished ocean. Then it collided with Europe, and the continent died slowly under pressure. Most of it was forced downward into the earth, while pieces of its surface were scraped off, folded, shattered, and lifted into mountains. But the idea is difficult to imagine because Europe feels permanent. Italy, the Balkans, Greece, the Alps, and surrounding regions seem like stable parts of the map. But geology tells a darker story. Much of southern Europe is built from the remains of a vanished continental plate. The rocks that form parts of the Alps, Apennines, Dinarides, and other Mediterranean mountain belts are not just local scenery. They are fragments of Greater Adria's former surface, torn away as the landmass was swallowed beneath the European plate. A continent did not disappear into myth. It was physically recycled into the ground beneath later civilizations. Greater Adria broke away from Gondwana more than 200 million years ago and moved north across the ancient Tethys Ocean. For vast stretches of time, it was not a single dry continent like the ones on a school map. Much of it may have been covered by shallow tropical seas with islands, carbonate platforms, and marine environments forming thick layers of limestone. These rocks later became the stone of southern Europe. The marble, cliffs, ridges, and mountains that humans would one day quarry, climb, worship, and build upon were born from the slow destruction of this older world. What makes Greater Adria unsettling is that no human ever saw it as a continent, and it was gone long before our species existed. There are no surviving myths of its drowning, no ancient maps marking its shoreline, no oral memory of people fleeing its collapse. And yet its remains shaped the stage on which later human history unfolded. The stones of the Mediterranean world, the mountains that shaped borders, the passes that guided armies, the coasts that framed trade routes, all were influenced by the collision and burial of this lost landmass. A dead continent became the foundation of living history. It also changes the meaning of lost. Greater Adria is not lost because it is unknown now. The scientists have reconstructed it through rock chemistry, structural geology, plate motion, and computer models. It is lost because the original geography no longer exists in a form anyone could walk across. Its body was broken, its surface was peeled away, its deeper crust was dragged into the mantle. What remains are fragments scattered across countries, folded into mountains and hidden beneath modern political maps. To see Greater Adria today, you do not look for an island. You look at southern Europe and realize parts of it are the exposed wreckage of another continent. There is something almost disturbing about that. A person can stand in the Alps or walk through Italian limestone without realizing the ground beneath them is not simply European in origin. It is the scraped skin of a vanished landmass. The same rocks that later became landscapes of empires, roads, temples, cathedrals, and ruins were once part of a separate geological world. Human civilization built meaning on stone that came from a continent already destroyed before humanity began. Greater Adria belongs in this list because it reminds us that continents are not eternal. They drift, collide, sink, split, and vanish. The map we trust is only the current frame of a film that has been playing for hundreds of millions of years. What looks like stable ground may be wreckage. What looks like a mountain range may be the folded remains of a lost world. The planet does not preserve continents out of respect for their size. Given enough time, even a landmass the size of Greenland can be erased. The horror of Greater Adria is quiet but immense. It did not vanish in a flood witnessed by humans. It vanished through tectonic force, swallowed into the earth and reborn as mountains. No survivor remembered it, no map recorded it, no legend mourned it. But its remains are everywhere beneath southern Europe, holding up landscapes where history later unfolded. Greater Adria proves that a continent can die and still remain under our feet, not as a place we can return to, but as a ghost written into stone. Number 5, Kumari Kandam, the drowned Tamil motherland. South of India, in Tamil tradition, there is a land that no longer rises above the sea. It is known as Kumari Kandam, a lost southern homeland said to have stretched beyond the tip of the Indian subcontinent into the Indian Ocean. In later stories, it became a drowned continent, the cradle of ancient Tamil civilization, swallowed by waves in a series of floods. Mainstream history treats much of this as legend and cultural memory rather than literal geography. But the story remains disturbing because it is built around something real. Seas have risen, coastlines have vanished, and many ancient shores are now underwater. The Tamil tradition speaks of lost lands, lost cities, and earlier gatherings of poets whose works disappeared before the surviving age of Tamil literature. The details are difficult to verify, and the timescales stretch far beyond what archaeology can prove. But the emotional core is powerful. An old culture remembers that the ocean took something from it. What survived was only a later fragment of a larger world. Whether that world was a true continent or a drowned coastal landscape, the memory of loss remains central. What makes Kumari Kandam unsettling is the geography beneath the myth. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were much lower than today. Across the world, continental shelves now drowned were once exposed as coastal plains. South of India, shorelines would have looked different when the sea was lower. Fishing grounds, river mouths, camps, coastal routes, and settlements near the old shore could now lie beneath water and sediment. The legend may not describe a real continent in the geological sense, but it may preserve the trauma of real land loss. That is where the story becomes difficult to dismiss completely. Human beings do not need a whole continent to lose a world. A coastline can be a world. A river delta can be a world. A chain of low islands, fishing places, burial grounds, and sacred routes can be a world. But if rising seas consumed those places over generations, survivors would not remember a scientific sea level curve. They would remember fields gone, ancestors moving inland, old shorelines changing, and the south becoming water. Kumari Kandam also shows how lost land stories sit between science, identity, and imagination. Geology does not support a recent sunken supercontinent south of India. But culture often preserves loss in symbolic form. Why do old traditions speak of vanished lands? What was lost before written records survived? Why does the sea appear as the destroyer of an earlier world? The grand continent may be myth, but myths can form around real wounds, and the wound of the sea is one of the oldest in human history. There is a haunting possibility that Kumari Kandam is not a map of a lost continent, but a memory of repeated coastal drowning after the Ice Age. Around the world, flood traditions often gather around the Great Transition, when melting ice raised oceans and transformed human geography. People who lived near old shorelines were pushed inland. Places of food, travel, ritual, and identity disappeared. If Tamil traditions preserve even a distorted echo of such losses, then Kumari Kandam becomes less a fantasy land and more a cultural fossil. Not exact in detail, but real in grief. Proof is difficult because the ocean hides evidence better than soil does. Underwater archaeology must face currents, sediment, depth, erosion, and enormous cost. If prehistoric coastal sites once existed south of India or along drowned shelves, many may be damaged, buried, or undiscovered. Absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence when the possible evidence lies beneath the sea. That is why Kumari Kandam belongs on this list. Not because we can say the legendary continent existed exactly as described, but because the story stands where memory, sea level rise, and identity meet. It asks whether ancient literature can preserve echoes of landscapes archaeology has not recovered. It asks how much human prehistory is missing because it happened on coasts that are now gone. Kumari Kandam remains terrifying because it may be both myth and warning. The vast continent belongs to legend, but drowned coastlines are real. Lost settlements are possible. Memories of the sea taking land are not absurd. Somewhere south of India, beneath water, sediment, and time, there may be fragments of a prehistoric shoreline that once meant everything to the people who lived there. And if those fragments are ever found, they may prove something more human than a lost continent, that long before history was written, people watched their world sink and refused to forget. Number 4. Terra Australis, the southern land on ancient maps. Long before Antarctica was officially confirmed by modern explorers, old maps were already haunted by a southern continent. It appeared under names like Terra Australis, the unknown southern land, a vast mass drawn at the bottom of the world to balance the continents of the north. To many modern eyes, it looks like guesswork, cartographers filling empty space with imagined geography. But the persistence of that southern land across centuries makes it difficult to ignore. Long before ships had fully mapped the polar seas, the idea of a great land in the far south kept returning. Part of the explanation is simple. The ancient and medieval geographers believed the Earth needed balance. If there were large lands in the northern hemisphere, then perhaps there had to be land in the south as well. This was not modern science. It was theory, philosophy, and inherited geography mixed together. But what makes Terra Australis unsettling is that the guess was not entirely wrong. There really was a southern continent. Antarctica existed all along, hidden behind ice, storms, distance, and the limits of navigation. The maps were not accurate in detail, but the empty bottom of the world was not empty. But the mystery deepens with maps like the Piri Reis map of 1513 and later early modern charts that seem to show southern coastlines before those regions were supposed to be known. Most mainstream scholars explain these shapes as distorted versions of South America, speculative landmasses, or cartographic tradition rather than proof of ancient Antarctic surveys. That caution matters. A strange coastline on an old map is not enough to rewrite history, but the maps remain powerful because they reveal how long humans imagined, inherited, and redrew knowledge about lands they could not fully reach. Even errors can preserve old ideas, and old ideas sometimes point toward real geography. The Terra Australis also belongs in this list because it exposes a gap between discovery and existence. Antarctica did not begin existing when Europeans saw it. It was always there, ancient, frozen, and enormous. The southern continent waited outside the known world, shaping oceans and climate while mapmakers argued over its form. Human knowledge arrived late. That is the humbling part. A landmass can be real for millions of years and still remain outside the official map until tools, ships, and courage finally catch up. Some versions of the Terra Australis mystery go further, claiming that ancient maps preserve memories of Antarctica before it was fully covered in ice. That claim is controversial and not accepted by mainstream geology. Antarctica has been ice-covered for far longer than any known human civilization. But the fascination remains because the maps create an emotional problem. They show that human beings were drawing the outline of an unseen south before they could explain how they knew it should be there. Whether through reasoning, rumor, lost sources, or coincidence, the idea kept surviving. The terrifying part is not that every map proves a forgotten civilization mapped Antarctica. They do not. The terrifying part is that old maps remind us how fragile the record of knowledge can be. Cartographers copied earlier cartographers. Ancient texts influenced medieval charts. Sailor reports mixed with myth. Libraries burned. Source maps disappeared. A coastline could survive as a distorted copy long after the original reason for drawing it was lost. What we see on a surviving map may be the final echo of a much older chain of information, already broken before the modern world began. Terra Australis is therefore both real and ghostly. As Antarctica, it is a confirmed continent. As a map tradition, it is a phantom shape that appeared before certainty. It sits between science and imagination, between correct intuition and incorrect detail. It proves that maps are never just pictures of land. They are records of fear, theory, hope, memory, and absence. The blank spaces frightened people, so they filled them. Sometimes what they filled them with turned out to resemble something real. That is why Terra Australis belongs at number 4. It is not a drowned homeland like Doggerland, and not a cultural memory like Kumari Kandam. It is a continent that existed beyond reach while maps tried to summon it into view. For centuries, the far south was a place of speculation, monsters, ice, impossible coastlines, and inherited rumors. Then the age of exploration revealed the truth. There was a land there, after all, larger and more hostile than almost anyone imagined. The old maps were wrong in many ways, but they were right about one thing. The bottom of the world was not empty. Number 3. Hyperborea, the Arctic land beyond the north wind. In ancient Greek tradition, far beyond the cold breath of the northern winds, there was said to be a mysterious land called Hyperborea. It was not described as an ordinary island or a simple unexplored coast. It was imagined as a remote northern world, unreachable by normal travel, blessed by strange light, long days, and a people living beyond the storms that defined the known edge of the world. To modern history, Hyperborea is usually treated as myth, a poetic land at the border between geography and imagination. Number 2, Lemuria and Mu, the mythic continents of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Some lost continents begin as geology. Others begin as questions that science cannot yet answer, then drift into myth. Lemuria was born in the 19th century when naturalists struggled to explain why lemur-like animals appeared in Madagascar, India, and parts of Southeast Asia. Before plate tectonics solved the problem, one proposed answer was a vanished landmass across the Indian Ocean. It was called Lemuria, a scientific hypothesis that later died as geology improved. But the idea did not disappear. It escaped science and entered occult writing, lost civilization theories, and the imagination of people who believed the oceans were hiding a forgotten homeland. Mu followed a similar path, but across the Pacific. Writers in the early 20th century described it as a vast, drowned motherland, a continent that supposedly connected island cultures, megaliths, myths, and symbols scattered across the world's largest ocean. Mainstream archaeology rejects Mu as a real prehistoric civilization. There is no accepted evidence for an advanced Pacific continent that sank in human time. But the myth survived because the Pacific itself feels like a puzzle. Thousands of islands separated by enormous distances, ancient voyagers crossing open water with astonishing skill, and stone monuments standing in places that seem too remote for simple explanations. What makes Lemuria and Mu unsettling is not that they are proven continents. They are not. Their power comes from the strange space between outdated science, real submerged geology, and human memory. The 19th century version of Lemuria was wrong, but the ocean really does hide fragments of ancient land. Zealandia is real. Mauritia is real. The continental shelves, volcanic plateaus, drowned ridges and submerged island chains exist across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The mythic continents were drawn in the wrong way, but they were born from a correct instinct. The modern ocean is not empty. It covers older geographies. The Pacific especially invites this kind of speculation because it is both vast and culturally connected. Polynesian navigators crossed distances that once seemed impossible to outsiders, using stars, waves, winds, birds, and memory. Their voyages did not require a lost continent to explain them. They required skill and knowledge of the sea at a level outsiders often underestimated. But myths of Mu tried to fill the emotional gap those outsiders felt when looking at the Pacific. How could people and stories spread so widely across such an enormous ocean? The answer was not a vanished empire beneath the waves. The answer was human navigation. Lemuria also changed meaning when it entered cultural and spiritual traditions. In some South Asian and Tamil contexts, it became linked with ancient southern lands, lost origins, and drowned memory. In occult traditions, it became something far stranger, a stage for imagined root races and prehistoric civilizations. These versions tell us more about modern imagination than deep prehistory. But even false maps can reveal real anxieties. They show the fear that history is incomplete, that origins have been misplaced, and that the sea may have swallowed evidence we can no longer recover. The truly disturbing part is that the myths are wrong, but not meaningless. Science can reject a sunken supercontinent called Mu, while still admitting that the Pacific contains huge submerged structures. It can reject Lemuria as the explanation for animal distribution, while still confirming that pieces of continental crust lie hidden beneath the Indian Ocean. The legends fail as literal geography, yet they survive because the oceans are genuinely filled with lost terrain, and they are built on error, but they point toward a real darkness underwater. Lemuria and Mu belong on this list because they are warnings about how lost lands are created in the human mind. A real scientific problem appears. A missing map is imagined. A theory becomes a story becomes a civilization becomes a vanished world people want to believe in. Somewhere along the way, fact and fantasy become tangled so tightly that even when the theory dies, the name continues to live. In the end, Lemuria and Mu may not prove that ancient maps preserved a drowned super-civilization, but they prove something else. The oceans are so vast, so poorly remembered, and so full of hidden geology that human imagination keeps trying to turn the unknown into a lost homeland. Beneath the Indian and Pacific Oceans, there may be no Mu, no Lemurian Empire, no drowned motherland of all civilization. But there are real submerged plateaus, real continental fragments, real islands lost to sea level rise, and real histories still waiting underwater. The myth is false in detail, but true in fear. The sea has taken worlds before, and we still do not know everything it has kept. Number 1. Atlantis, the lost continent that refuses to die. No lost land has haunted human imagination like Atlantis. Around 360 BC, Plato described an island power beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient gateway we now associate with the Strait of Gibraltar. He said it was wealthy, organized, militarily powerful, and then destroyed in a single catastrophe of earthquakes and floods. To mainstream scholarship, Atlantis is usually read as philosophy, warning, political allegory, or myth. But it refuses to disappear because Plato did not describe it vaguely. He gave it a location, a chain of transmission, and a date that still makes people uncomfortable. According to the story, the account came from Egyptian priests who told it to Solon, an Athenian statesman, long before Plato wrote it down. They claimed the Greeks had forgotten earlier catastrophes because their records had been destroyed, while Egypt had preserved older memory. That detail matters because Atlantis is not framed as a dream or a fairy tale inside the dialogue. It is framed as inherited history, passed from priests to traveller to philosopher. Whether that chain is true or literary invention, it gives the story a strange authority. It feels like a fragment from an older archive. The date is even more unsettling. Plato places the destruction around 9,000 years before Solon, roughly near the end of the last ice age, if taken literally. That period was real. Sea levels were rising, ice sheets were melting, coastlines across the world were being redrawn, Doggerland was drowning, Beringia was changing, continental shelves that had supported animals and people were disappearing underwater. If ancient people remembered a world lost to the sea, the end of the Ice Age is exactly where such memories would begin. The location also keeps the question alive. Atlantis was placed beyond Gibraltar in the Atlantic. Tick. That ocean contains submerged shelves, ridges, seamounts, plateaus, drowned coastlines, and islands that have changed with sea level. None of this proves Atlantis existed as Plato described it. But it means the setting is not meaningless. The Atlantic really did contain exposed coastal worlds during glacial low stands, and many of those places are now underwater. A story about a powerful land destroyed by sea and earthquake may be allegory, but it also echoes real planetary change. Ancient and medieval maps added fuel to the mystery. Some charts showed phantom islands in the Atlantic, lands that appeared for centuries and then vanished from cartography when exploration failed to confirm them. High Brazil, Antillia, and other map ghosts remind us that the Atlantic was long treated as a place of hidden land. Most of those islands were errors, rumours, or copied traditions. But their persistence shows something important. Maps do not only record what is known. They also preserve what people believed, inherited, feared, or half-remembered. That is why Atlantis remains dangerous as an idea. If it is only Plato's invention, then it is one of the most powerful fictional geographies ever created.